Hello, this is Ken Ferry with this week's Boots in the Field report. This past weekend provided a variety of weather, from heavy rain, hail, and sunshine, depending on where you live. For some of our operations, the Mother's Day massacre continues. Local growers here are still trying to finish up both corn and bean planting. The seed corn planting is off with a strong push this week. We do have some spotting in of corn and soybeans in troubled areas, and a few cases where total replant of fields has also taken place. Many growers are done or will be in the next few days, and maybe finishing up into mid next week. Talking with our out-of-state growers, the guys in northern Ohio said the strip-till corn is really going in nice. The early beans are all planted. Need another 3-4 days to finish up on the corn. Central Wisconsin, they're still dealing with some soil temps in the 40s last week. Rain kept them out through Mother's Day weekend. Said the wheat is looking good, and planting is getting started this week where they didn't get the heavy rains. Southern Iowa was dealt with rain and hail, but again, guys talking like they should finish. Our guys around Cedar Rapids are getting back in after rain out. Early beans are in, and they too need about another 4 days to finish up corn. North Central Iowa dealing with some real heavy rains up there, and it's going to unfortunately trigger some replants, but temperatures are looking good. There too, if they can get another week, they'll finish up the planting, again outside of the heavy rained on areas. Locally, we're seeing some good stands in both corn and beans as this crop continues to develop. We had to deal or look at some fields this week with hail damage from last week's storms, and it was spotty. Reduced some bean stands 3 to 5%, but also triggered some replants in some of the heavier pockets. The rain amounts and the intensity at which they fell were sure sporadic, going from 0.4 to 4 inches in a matter of miles. This has caused some crusting in some fields and then need to be attended to with the hose if they haven't been already. Other fields where we pushed to find moisture last week, if you're one of those fields and you got one of these 3 or 4 inch rains, that corn may be too deep. So we need to keep an eye on those. Don't let a crust happen. And if we need to replant these fields, we need to pull that trigger quick so we're still in a window when we can get optimum yields. Wheat flowering is underway for most of the state, especially from the central south. So that's going to trigger fungicide applications for this week into next week. Now, growers are asking about adding some insecticide to their fungicide to get ahead of the potential armyworm problem that we could have around the corner. Now, I personally think this is a good idea to suppress the armyworms and other pests. The timing is not great. By the time we see armyworms, most of these insecticides are going to be running out. But this will help with those first laid armyworm eggs, and may help keep that number more manageable if a problem develops like the trap counts indicate. Now, with that said, you may still have to come back with a more timely treatment if the pressure is too high for too long. Talking with a friend in Kentucky, he said his customers have already applied their fungicide, of course, because their wheat is ahead of ours. And he said most of the fields are dealing with armyworm down there, and the fields that had an insecticide with the fungicide have a noticeable less amount of activity. Our challenge is the fungicide needs to go on now in this flowering window. And we may not see a big push of armyworm for another 2 weeks until we get another 250, 300 insect heat units. Now, most insecticides will have about a week of good residual for armyworm, maybe another week of low residual, meaning the insecticide is going to be running out by the time the pressure is turning on. If you're not spraying for head scab, I would wait until we see armyworm before we pull the trigger. But you can't delay your head scab treatment waiting for the armyworm or you'll miss it. The trap counts for armyworm are high. This doesn't always correlate to heavy pressure. Mother Nature sometimes throws curveballs at us. But we can't ignore the fact that the risks are high for this wheat crop. This crop is worth too much to miss this one, so pest teams stay on top of the threat. You know, when the sign on the highway says speed monitored by traffic cameras ahead, you don't have to slow down, but you shouldn't complain when you get a ticket in the mail. Again, a big thanks to our customers and Rebecca over at SunAg for helping us monitor the traps, or should I say traffic cameras. This week now we are seeing cut plants and shot hole feeding. Some guys have already sprayed fields for the cutworm activity. For the fields that have traits to protect you from cutworm, you will have some shot hole feeding, maybe even a few cut plants that cutworm has to feed to take in the poison. But when you do see the feeding, still stay on top of it. Make sure something doesn't go wrong there. Now, your conventional corn, or corn not carrying a trait for cutworm, like your double pros, will have to be watched from the first day that we see the feeding until the corn's big enough to get around that. I'm going to be up in that V4 to V5 range. If you applied an insecticide with the planter that handles cutworms, you should be all right. But again, don't take that for granted. Scout those fields. These recent rains will help with our planter-applied insecticides because the cutworm will crawl across the surface and with this moisture and be traveling through the insecticide and catch them. When it's dry, like it was a week ago, they'll travel under the surface and sometimes the insecticide from the planter and what we spray isn't as effective. Now, of course, the big threat is our no-till and our cover crop fields. But this week we saw shot hole feeding and cut plants in tilled fields that had winter annuals in them when the flights took place. Cutworm are easy to kill, guys, so don't drop the ball on this one. Some of your non-GMO premium or the cost savings from buying a double pro should go towards managing cutworm if it shows up. Some question, can we get the cutworm when we do our post-corn herbicide? The answer is yes, if the timing's right. You spray weeds based on size and cutworm based on feeding. Don't miss the window of either. We've had many waves of high cutworm catches with no freezes to take them out. So this cutworm thing will be with us for some time. So stay on top of the scouting. Some of our early April planted corn in that V4, V5 stage will be entering what we call the ugly corn phase, the end of this week into next week, as the root systems are starting to hand off from the seed root to the true roots. Anything that has interfered with crown root development will show up in uneven growth and color. If any fields have herbicide carryover issues from last year's dry June, now is when they're going to start to show up. Some areas that received very little rain prior to this weekend will show a little uneven growth due to the dry soil not allowing the crown roots to develop like they should. Now, these recent rains should fix that pretty quick. Now is the time to give these stands a thorough look. Some of the answers to what happened are visible now, but won't be later in the year. Stretch those tapes, get stand counts, look for uniformity, predict your ear count. Most important is to dig in the gaps and find out what happened. Today, we can identify the cause or at least break it down to a few possibilities. Later on in the summer, the evidence will be gone, and all we can say is we have a gap. We may be able to take the easy answer then and blame it on seed quality, but we really don't know. The late emergers are a little different. They'll leave a fossil record that'll help us identify what caused the problem even later on in the summer. For those of you signing up fields for our virtual field visit, our technicians will be taking pictures and video of the late emergers above and below ground. The fossil record will lead us to the problem and will allow us to come up with suggestions on how to fix it for next year. But in July and August, when our virtual farm visits are taking place, the seed will be rotted away, and all we'll have is a gap. When I ask a grower on a farm visit, what happened to the missing plants, and he says, I don't know, man, it's hard to come up with answers when the evidence is gone. So let's get our stand counts and projected ear counts done now when we have some evidence to tell us whether the missing plants are due to insects, seed quality, or growing conditions. It's high ear count, not high stand counts, that create the high yields. Helping a grower with some cutworm scouting decisions this week, he mentioned that he was happy with his corn stand, counting around 30,000 plants. I asked 30,000 plants or ears? He said stand, 30,000 plants. When I asked his planting rate, he said 36,000. 30,000 from 36 is already a drop of 17% from planted. If we lose some ears off of that on top of it, we're over 20% drop from planted population. And remember, the average should be around 13%, with our goal is to get you guys closer to a 6% drop, which would be around 34,000 ears. Having an ear count of 30,000 from a planted population of 32 would be on target, but not from a 36,000 planted population. At this point, we need to try to look for answers to improve the situation. I am concerned about some of our seed quality issues this year. When I look at the average cold germ of 100 plus samples that we sent in this year, the average is 88 on cold germ. Compare that to 22 and 21, where it was 97 and 96%. So if the samples that you guys have sent in represent the bulk of the corn planted this year, it may answer why we're seeing a 10 to a 15% drop in stand from our planted population, especially in that earlier planted corn. Nitrates are starting to come in now for the side dress season, but we still don't have enough in to make a call on how friendly a spring we have when it comes to nitrogen. Last year we saw a lot of uniformity in the nitrates due to dry conditions in a big part of the state. With the heavy amounts of rain in some of these pop-up showers this year, it'll be a little more widespread on which fields and how much was lost compared to last year. But time will tell. For those of you signing up fields for the virtual farm visit, Crop Tech agronomists will be making contact with you in the coming weeks to pick the deep dive sites in each field, where an in-depth data collection and pictures will be collected. Now, these sites can change as the season progresses, if need be, but allow our GIS crew here time to get the packets ready for the field technician. If you want more information on signing up the fields, call the office or check it out on our website. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.